What's going on, boxing fans? It's Julian Williams with The Distance. Have another fantasy matchup for you guys. This one's one of my own. This one is Carlos Monzon versus Bernard Hopkins, middleweight matchup. This one puts together two of the best middleweight champions of all time. Bernard Hopkins won the USBA middleweight championship in 1992 against Wayne Powell. Went on a year later, lost to Roy Jones Jr. for the vacant IBF. And I think the IBF was vacant, I'm not sure. But lost that matchup. Eventually won the championship of April of 1994 in a rematch against Segundo Mercado, or Mercado, whatever. And went on, he defended the championship for a few years, took on John David Jackson, Glenn Johnson, the only man to ever knock out Glenn Johnson his entire career. And, was involved in that middleweight tournament, defeated Antoine Eccles in like 99. Very solid contender. Participated in that middleweight tournament in 2001, which had I believe it was William Joppy, Keith Holmes, and Felix Trinidad. And he beat I think he beat Keith Holmes first and got the WBC middleweight championship, and then he beat Felix Trinidad and got the WBA, I believe, the WBA championship, and had the ring as well. So he continued fighting until 2004, and he fought Oscar De La Hoya, and he collected the WBO championship to his belt, and fought Howard Eastman, then lost the championships to Jermaine Taylor about 10 years after he won, about 20 title defenses. In between the time he won the championship. So very good, slick, crafty fighter, and learned a lot over the years. One of the masterminds in the ring. As far as ring psychology goes, because I think that Bernard Hopkins over the years has mastered it down very well. And Carlos Monzon, another great champion, won the championship against Nino Benvenuti in 1970, like November 1970, and continued fighting until he did get stripped of the championship for not fighting Rodrigo Valdez. I believe he got shot before that fight, or something like that, and he didn't, do the fight. So he was stripped of the WBC championship, I believe, and Rodrigo Valdez had his championship. And he pretty much he beat Valdez twice at the end of his career in 76, 77. He held the championship for about 7 years. Took on some very good opposition. See, at this time there wasn't a in between middleweight and welterweight. There was no light middleweight at the time. So the welterweight champion Jose Napoles had moved up, and he fought Carlos Monzon. Monzon beat him. And Emil Griffith, another former welterweight champion, moved up and he beat him as well. And not to mention Valdez was a very good fighter. Nino Benvenuti was a very good fighter as well. Knocked him out. So, and I think I think he fought Anthony Mundine's father, Tony Mundine. Not necessarily a notable name, but that's just another person he beat. But pretty much he fought practically everybody at that time. He didn't fight Marvin Hagler. I think at the time Marvin Hagler was probably a bit green, so he didn't face Marvin Hagler. But his career at middleweight was very solid. So in a fight like this, you have two different styles coming together, and Hopkins' style, Hopkins does a very good job of countering. Countering and tying up and hitting on the break, whatever, using all kinds of, not necessarily dirty tactics, but tactics. Very tactical and crafty fighter to win fights. And against Carlos Monzon, Monzon was very skilled. Monzon pretty much he stood straight up and knew how to pretty much throw straight shots. But sometimes there were times when he would kind of sneak in. He would shorten up his shots and stuff. He had like a 77-inch reach. He was about 5'11". He had 77-inch reach. He he would shorten the shots up, and basically it would surprise a lot of opponents. But sometimes Monzon was a little hesitant against counter punches. I forgot the name of the fighter. I think it was Benny Briscoe. He was a counter puncher, and he was a little hesitant early in the early goings in that fight when he was throwing his shots, when he was throwing his left jab, because I know he was probably aware that Briscoe was a counter puncher, and he didn't want to get countered, if he missed. So against the Bernard Hopkins, I think that Monzon would fight a very smart fight. I think Monzon would pretty much just try to stand in front of Hopkins, because I know Hopkins is going to move a lot. I think he's going to try to get some shots in on the inside and clinch and hold, especially with Monzon being the bigger fighter, being the taller and pretty much the longer fighter, the rangier of the two. But Monzon did a very good job of walking his opponents down, using his size as an advantage to walking his opponents down. And the question is, would that be too much for Hopkins? And at the same time, would Monzon be hesitant to let the hands go? And because Monzon was the type of fighter, when he smelled blood, he went for the kill. But against a fighter with a very good chin like Hopkins, that more than likely he won't hurt, or that would he be discouraged? I doubt it, because I doubt that he'd be discouraged, because a lot of his fights, went to decision. I think out of all the fights he had like 59 knockouts, I believe. He had about 59. And I think he had like, I don't know how many fights he had. I think he had like 80 fights. Let me look here. He had 87 fights, and pretty much only had 59 knockouts. So I don't think he'd be discouraged about that. But at the same time, if his shots aren't getting there, if his jab doesn't have that stationary target, but at the same time, Hopkins could probably land a lot of his shots on the inside, but he would have to take that jab away, and I think he knows that. But if I had to come up with a winner for this fight, I'll go with Carlos Monzon with the upset. And this is not undermining Hopkins' skill or anything. I just think Carlos Monzon has a little more, in his arsenal than Hopkins. I think that one thing that will stand out is that Monzon, he did have very good skill, but he was more effective offensively. I think he's more effective offensively. I think he'll throw a lot of shots. I think he'll throw a big assortment of shots in this fight. Even if Hopkins counters, I think the assortment of shots that he's going to throw, the relentlessness, is going to be what stands out. And I think that Carlos Monzon wins this fight via unanimous decision. But anyway, that was the distance. Thanks for watching. Peace.